Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from whichever part of the world you're joining us from. My name is Chandani Jaswal, and on behalf of ISHA, I welcome you to the second talk of the online PhD talk series that we are hosting here at the International Students History Association. We are joined today by David Kraus, who is a PhD candidate at Philipps University, Marburg, working on Pope Innocent IV and the Empire. He previously studied at Heidelberg University, where he finished his bachelor's in history in 2019 and went on an Erasmus exchange to Salamanca. He finished his master's in history in 2022 with a thesis on the negotiations on the First Crusade of Saint Louis of France. Afterwards, he enrolled in the PhD program and has been continuing his research, focusing on the mid-13th century, the papacy of Innocent IV, and the crusade against the one Hohenstaufen. I hope, David, I got it right. And we're very, very delighted to have you over. And now over to you. We can't wait to hear about your research. David.
Yeah, thank you for the kind words. Pronunciation was good, no worries. Yeah, also, hello everyone. Good evening, at least from my side here, or whatever time zone you're in. Yes, tonight I'm gonna present, give the presentation titled, as you heard, Pope Innocent IV and the Crusade against Hohenstaufen, which is mostly going to be covering an overview over my PhD project, which originally, as the working title or the official title still is Pope Innocent IV and the Empire. By now, as it goes to, during the work on it in the last years, the thematic focus has been shifted a bit towards the more concrete point of the conflict in between Pope Innocent IV and Emperor Frederick II and his family, successors, and his party, basically. So the crusade against the Hohenstaufens is by now the main focus of the project. Hereby, I try to see how this conflict or these conflicts in between Pope Innocent IV and the pro-Staufen party in the empire and the emperor was shaped by phenomena that we also know from the Crusades, and how these conflicts therefore can be understood as a political crusade, and how this conflict was basically shaped by the crusading mentality and legalities. So what's gonna happen tonight? Basically, the whole thing here is thought as somewhat as an introductory lecture on the 1240s and the problem of the Crusades and the Crusades happening during that time span, during the papacy of Innocent IV, so basically 1243 to 1254. First, I'm going to start with a theoretical part. What actually is a crusade? Because normally, as most people think about the Crusades into the Levant, into the Holy Land, into Palestine, Israel, modern-day Israel, Palestine. Afterwards, I'm going to give some context about the political situation in the first half of the 1240s. So at the start of Innocent IV papacy. Thereafter, I will then go on to give an outline of the conflict about the conflict in between the papacy and the Hohenstaufens during the following years until the end of Innocent's papacy. But yeah, should we then still have time, I will also go on a bit about the implications for parallel crusades, but that will have to be seen since we started already a bit late, and how well timed my presentation then actually is. So I'll see how far we'll get. So what even is a crusade? Let's start by a definition. Most of you might remember this classical list, as it is in the English language at least, from your high school textbooks, maybe even bachelor seminars at university. Starting from the First Crusade, they all are wonderfully numbered until the Eighth Crusade at the end of the 13th century, and shortly thereafter, the last remnants of the Crusader states fall anyways, and then continue some dubious later crusades, which of course one could continue until the conflicts against the Ottomans, but that is not the topic for tonight. But where do we actually get these lists from? These listings, especially with the enumeration, are entirely an artificial construct of historiography, and not contemporary at all. In the contemporary terminology didn't even have, during that period, a term for or using the term crusade. The middle, or the Old French, yeah, the French and Middle English equivalents, croisade and croiserie. Excuse my pronunciation. Reading in these languages works, but I don't speak or pronounce them. So only appear at the end of the 13th century, beginning of the 14th century to be used. The contemporaries were mostly speaking of iter, so journey, peregrinatio, pilgrimage, even though then armed, or then the crux, trans, or cismarina, so just the cross in general. At the end of the during the 12th century, slowly the term crucisignatus, so crossbearer, crusader, started to appear, and from that on, we got at some point the term crusade. But yeah, if these terms are actually, if the contemporary terms are actually different, then how do we get this list? Or why is then only this list of the 8 crusades, of these 8 numerated crusades? Looking at different languages, the numberation can vary, of course. Sticking here to the English one as like as a standard. What we see here on this list is all of them are like crusades with the original aim towards the east, towards the Levant. Of course, the 4th Crusade is an outlier, which then went on to sack Constantinople and never reached its goal. The same for the 8th Crusade, which then already was aimed at Tunis. Or like the 5th Crusade, which went on to Egypt. But what is missing is a lot of smaller crusading movements in this period. Speaking about the Barons' Crusade, speaking about stuff like the Children's phenomenon, like the Children's Crusade, for example. What is also missing is like the later crusades, all the crusades that happened in the 13th and 14th century that I referred to earlier. What is also missing is crusading activities in the Balticum, or in the Baltics, carried out by the Teutonic Order. But it's then, of course, what is also missing is like the whole reconquista or conquista on the Iberian Peninsula and its outreach towards Northern Africa. Also missing is the crusades against heretics, most famously known probably the crusades against the Cathars. So how do we then even get that the stuff included? In the historiography of the last, basically the last 1.5 centuries, there is a couple of schools have been developed, schools of thought have been developed on how to define a crusade and what to focus on and what to categorize as a crusade. There are the traditionalists, which focus on the crusade as like a military campaign sanctified by the Pope, which has the aim to conquer Jerusalem, especially the holy sites in Palestine. And so mostly, therefore, integrating or sticking with that classical list that you might know from your textbooks, including a couple others, depending on the scholar, of course, excluding a couple others. Then there are the popularists, which basically focus on the Crusades as popular movements from below, and on the spiritual mindset in the Crusaders, or those people involved with the Crusades. A more broader term, trying to include all these other phenomena that I listed earlier, which generally also might be categorized under Christian Holy War and the Crusade, try to include the pluralists, so trying to solve these questions. Because for them, the Crusade is basically, to keep it short, a campaign or military campaign sanctioned by the Pope, granting the participants and supporters indulgences and temporal privileges. And this campaign is then carried out against enemies or perceived enemies of the Church or slash Latin Christendom, most from the perspective of the medieval Church being one and the same. And there are the generalists which try to avoid grasping the whole phenomenon of the Crusades under a rigid definition, since it's mostly a scholarly construct. But since no definition at all, even though it might be useful sometimes, especially in the more in more fringe phenomena, some form of definition, to have some form of working definition seems useful. So what I'm trying to do is to apply this pluralist definition to the conflict, pluralist definition of the Crusades, to the conflict in between Pope Innocent IV and Frederick II and his successors. With this pluralist definition, all these different terms, all these different phenomena that I listed earlier, are then or can then be considered crusades. So there are then crusades to the Levant, which are basically the classical list of 8, which also then includes the whole happenings in Greece and Gaze after the Fourth Crusade. There are then crusades to Iberia and to the Baltics. And of course, then there are the internal crusades, which includes both the crusades against the so-called heretics, aka mostly the Cathars or the Bogomils, or in smaller local phenomena, and the political crusades against worldly enemies of the Church. In our talk here, we are laying somewhat in between, since of course the conflict with the Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire might be seen as like a classical case of a political crusade in the sense. But since papal propaganda, or since, as you're going to hear later, Frederick II was excommunicated once again, and basically declared as like the arch heretic by papal propaganda, the whole thing also could be somewhat considered as like a crusade against heresy. So, okay, so much for this definitory prelude. Let's get to the context of the 1240s. Pope Innocent IV got elected Pope in 1243. Before his election, there has been quite a comparatively long vacancy of the papal seat. Pope Gregory died in 1241, while he was also in conflict with Frederick II over, in this case, especially over dealings with Lombardy once again. A crusade against Frederick was already issued, and a general council was planned to move against the emperor even further. Neither of those really came to fruition due to the sudden death of the Pope. Shortly after, his successor Celestine IV was elected, but he also died still in 1241. And afterwards, until summer 1243, the cardinals couldn't decide on who to elect as the next pope, especially also with in the Curia being different factions in between, compromise with the empire or taking a hard line again. So yeah, so much for the papacy. To give a bit of a broader overview, in the beginning of the 1240s, we are at the height of the Mongol incursions into Europe just ended. Since Genghis Khan's creation of the Mongol Empire a couple decades earlier, the Mongol outreach towards the west had reached its height basically in the immediately before 1243. In 1241, the battle at Legnica in Silesia, in between, happened, which was in the northwest, furthest outreach of the Mongols, where German Polish army basically lost to the Mongols, but they then withdrew back to the Eurasian steppes because of internal problems. Still ongoing were Mongol raids and incursions into Hungary, which basically had been ravaged in the early 1240s by those Mongols. So much so that a crusade against these Mongols there had to be issued, and the already ongoing crusade against the perceived heretics of the Bosnian Church had to be stopped, basically. If you look further out east in Greece, basically the Latin Empire was still existing, but struggling already against the Empire of Nicaea, which was slowly reclaiming the former Byzantine territories in the Levant itself. The Barons' Crusade to support the remnants of the Crusader states was still ongoing, and Jerusalem was still in Christian hands since it had been won back for the Christians by treaty in between Fredrich II and Sultan al-Kamil. The Iberian Peninsula was entirely focused on its project of the Reconquista. So Portugal was busy in the Algarve, and Castile was progressing in Andalusia, or modern day Andalusia. The two main sources for the support for the Crusades, France and England, were, as in the following centuries should happen so often, already engaged in the war on about the continental holdings of the English kings, the so-called Centurion War. This conflict, or this ongoing conflict, was also one of the reasons why on the Barons' Crusade none of the big European kings took part, and so the leadership fell to Theobald of Champagne, which also was king of Navarre. So it had like a royal leader, but anyways, but the crown of Navarre apparently it wasn't considered big enough to have that crusade included into our enumerated list that I showed you earlier. And the empire, of course, was waiting for the election of a new pope to hopefully have the situation with the ongoing conflict in between church and empire, and Frederick II and his by the church supported opposition resolved. Now to the actual conflict itself. I divided the conflict base into four phases. The first phase lasting from the election of Pope Innocent to the Council of Lyon. Then the second phase from the Council of Lyon until the death of Enter-King Henry IV Raspe. A third phase under William of Holland until the death of Frederick II in 1250, and then a last phase until the death of Innocent IV in 1254. Now to the first phase. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I see. I need to hurry already a bit. Yeah. While Innocent IV was elected around the city of Viterbo had shifted sides from the imperial side to the side of the church, what later will be known as Guelphs and Ghibellines, but those parties were still in the formation at that point. And while there was initial hope for recanonization because Innocent IV, as like Sinibaldo Fieschi, as he was known before, was quite drawn to take a reconciliatory stance towards the empire. So there was hope to find a solution and for peace. Peace negotiations happened. Apparently, listening to the sources, some agreement had been reached. But since the conflict at Viterbo was still going on, and the imperial army therefore being in the heart of the Lazio, the situation for Innocent IV got a bit too dodgy for him, he deemed it too dangerous to stay there, and then basically took on flight while being pursued by agents of the empire, first overland towards the coast, and then via boat to Genoa, his hometown, from where he continued crossing the Alps to Lyon, where he took refuge for the next couple of years until he deemed it safe to return to Italy. So basically, I don't know, do you see my cursor? Can someone answer, please?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah, okay, good. So basically, where are we here? Yeah, okay, basically here from the center of the Patrimonium Petri, via boat all the way up to Genoa, and then from there, crossing the Alps towards Rome, towards the furthest outliers of the empire, right at the border with France, to the city and bishopric of Lyon, where he basically took over the role of the bishop as head of the city and moved the whole curia there, because then the location was chosen basically to be protected by the French king if an imperial army should march on the papal curia, on the curia. Yeah. So during this first phase, the crusading activities basically had been halted. Local conflicts, of course, continued between the different parties. But especially with the flight and the Pope being pursued and not even then being safe in Genoa, but having to continue all the way to Lyon to take refuge there. The conflict that was already ongoing under Gregory IX was taken up again, and the plans of the council also were renewed. So a general call for a council was issued, and this then was the first council of Lyon. And with this first council, we basically entered in the second phase. Since on that council, the whole council, due to the general situation that I described earlier, can be considered mainly a crusading council. So support for the struggling Latin Empire, mostly on the financial side, had been decided on since the Emperor Baldwin was traveling throughout Europe trying to look for support. against the Mongols, since in the meantime, driven out by the Mongols, the Khwarezmians had sacked Jerusalem and destroyed it, and so it was lost finally for Christendom. Plus, the Barons' Crusade suffered a defeat at La Forbie. A new crusade had to be issued, and as the French king Louis IX wanted to take over this project, his wish was granted for him, but this whole project of the crusade into the Levant was given over basically into French and English hands. Against the general threat of the Mongols, a double strategy was planned. A crusade into Hungary and to drive out the last remaining Mongols there was issued, plus plans for preparations against further Mongol incursions in Central and Eastern Europe were issued. On the other hand, though, the first mendicant priests were sent as envoys towards the Mongol Khans over the following years to find out more who these Mongols actually are, and to possibly even strike an alliance with them, going back to the medieval understanding of them, and the hope for Prester John waiting in the east, who could be used as a ally against the Muslims for the reconquest of the Holy Land. And of course, regarding the conflict with the emperor, the position and excommunication of Emperor Fredrich II was declared, and the crusade and the call for crusades that had been going on under Frederick IX were basically reissued, and mendicant priests being sent out throughout the empire, reaching the crusade against Frederick II. But besides these a low-level search for recruits and funding, of course, crusading 10th and 20th throughout Central Europe had been decided as well. Also, in the diplomatic interactions, the Curia also tried to consolidate the princely opposition against the Hohenstaufens in the empire around the Rhenish bishops, and in the end could gain or convince Henry IV Raspe, Landgrave of Thuringia, to be elected as anti-king. He, until in the years before, he still had been the administrator of the empire north of the Alps for Frederick II, while his son Conrad IV was still a minor. Also, a lot of prestige that he brought with him was his relationship to Saint Elizabeth, who just had been canonized and was a very relevant new figure in the saintly catalogue and in current memory. Yeah. 1 second. Okay. What I know. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, which then leads to his election close to Würzburg by mostly the bishop, mostly bishops. The council of electors in the empire was just about to form, but not yet fully fixed, which brought him the nickname Pfaffenkönig, basically priest king, which was derogatively meant in. From there on, he tried to move towards Frankfurt for his coronation, but Conrad IV marched with a pro-Stauffenian army against him, and it came to a battle at Nidda, which in the end Henry, the anti-king, won and drove off Conrad IV. Afterwards, he was crowned in Frankfurt and continued then his campaign in Swabia, and in the end besieged the city of Ulm. Even though that was unsuccessful, or since that was unsuccessful, and he got sick during that siege, he returned to Eisenach in Thuringia and died there in 47. So basically here we have a map again. So we see here Würzburg. So near Würzburg he was crowned, then marched over close to Frankfurt, where then the battle at Nidda happened, where he won, and from there onwards he marched south through Swabia and apparently conquered diverse castles, which are not named in the sources, on towards the city of Ulm. From where on he wanted to continue further southwards, which in the end never came to fruition, and then he had to return all the way back up to, let me see if I directly find Eisenach. Yeah, Eisenach is here, where he then died. In the meantime, the other local conflicts, for example, at here the Upper Rhine broke out as well. So these crusading activities, or the call for crusade, basically opened up a general call for the enemies of the emperor. After the death of Henry IV Raspe early in 47, the opposition needed a new figure to rally around. So and this was then found in Wilhelm of Orland, which then basically got supported by the opposition in the northwest of the empire. And in the beginning of October 1247, near Cologne, he was then elected as the new king of the Romans. And instead of going to Frankfurt like Raspe, he wanted to go to the imperial city of Aachen to get crowned king of the Romans there. The city of Aachen stayed though on the side of the Staufens, and so long siege by the Crusader army and under the anti-king happened until the city was finally taken and he could be crowned. In the meantime, on the Italian theater, where these local conflicts between these Guelph and Ghibelline, or Pars Ecclesia and Pars Imperii cities continued, and where Frederick II and most of his sons, basically everyone besides Conrad, who was in charge of the empire north of the Alps, were campaigning against armies under papal legates, culminated in the siege of Parma, which basically took the whole of 47, and in the end led to another imperial defeat and a general shift on the Italian side. After these two wins against the imperial side, Wilhelm of Holland continued to campaign along the Rhine and basically built himself a power base in the northwest of the empire against Conrad with like shifting successors. This basically continued until 1250, when Frederick II died, and this led to another pause of the whole crusading activity, since the Crusade or the preaching of the cross against his sons wasn't directly reissued. So there was again hope for a solution for the conflict. But when Conrad II started to march towards Italy from the north of the Alps, these calls for crusade were reissued, and with Conrad, basically the conflict moved mostly to the Regnum, so Sicily and the area of southern Italy around Naples. In the north of the Alps, the whole the direct crusading activity somewhat came to a halt, mostly because of the multitude of ongoing conflicts along the borders of the empire that had been broken out in this tumultuous period, mostly over succession crises in Denmark, Austria, Flanders, and Bohemia. Conrad takes over the siege or captures Naples basically, and takes over the regnum against his brother or half brother Manfred, and the Pope and his papal legates continue the crusade there. In 1254, Conrad dies, and Innocent IV marches on Naples. The city is captured by the papal side, and Manfred, who succeeds Conrad in the regnum, gets beaten by an imperial army. And in that moment of a perceived victory, Innocent IV though dies in December of 1254 as well. And therefore the conflicts were going to continue for the next couple of decades, basically until the Sicilian Vespers, when Karl of Anjou took the regnum, and afterwards Conradin, the last of the Hohenstaufens, got beheaded as well. Also, these conflicts under the successors of Innocent IV also then have been described as the Italian Crusades. Okay, and with that, I then a bit delayed and came to an end, and I hope I didn't rush through too much and then skip over too much information that I actually wanted to convey, and it was somewhat clear. Thanks for your attention, and hope there are some questions.
Thank you, David, for the fantastic presentation that you gave us on the Crusades. Dear audience, we are now open to questions. Please feel free to use the raise hand option, and if you'd like to come on camera, please to switch on your camera and ask your question directly. Alternatively, you can also use the Q&A option that you have on the top of your screen to type your questions in, and I can read those out to David. Maybe I'll get the ball rolling. And admittedly, I'm no student of the European history, but what we do study, David, in the eastern side of the world or in the Indic side of the world is that the Crusades, unlike how you would think early modern world works, the Crusades were deeply communal in nature. How true is this statement? Was there a lot of awareness about religion, or was it just ultimately the might is right sort of a thing that was happening? Is it communal? Are the Crusades communal at heart? I know it's a little off topic from what you've been discussing, but just like a general perception of if we are in that point of time, how would a general person, a common man who's got probably nothing to do with the war, view Crusades? Is it something that he deeply associates with as a Christian? Oh, this is my fight, or that is a very modern concept?
Yeah, the really common man might be somewhat difficult to grasp, but yeah, that's also a point looking at modern historiography, especially in that period. Often, even though, as you see with like this multitude of crusading projects that are going on all around Europe and beyond, basically on all sides and inside of Latin Christendom, the crusading spirit is still going everywhere. So for the 12th century, definitely the Crusades are a general thing, at least, and for the people, the support is going strong. So there is like these calls of crusade happening. People with family traditions keep coming, keep joining the Crusades because the uncle, the father, the grandfather, and even further have been going to the Crusades. Then, if you look now at the 1240s, apparently, or they are looking at the sources, first signs of a crumbling of this crusading spirit seems to have happened. So first, so that intellectual criticism of the Crusades starts to happen. be it then especially at stuff like here the crusade against the Hohenstaufens, where then if you take a traditionalist point of view on what the crusades are, delegitimizes the whole thing. But the legitimacy of a crusade is not really a question that I try to answer or something, but I just see it as like, okay, what is happening here? We have papal calls for crusade. We have Mendicant priests preaching for crusades. We have people paying the crusading 10th and 20th. We have people or armies and people electing the anti-kings described as crusaders. So basically, it looks like a crusade to me. And what is happening under this? Of course, there's criticisms from contemporaries. For example, there is reports of one preaching campaign somewhere in Bavaria, which was on the Staufian side in the early 1250s, and there the populace basically drove the I think it was Franciscan or Dominicans, but basically drove the preaching monks out of the town because they didn't want to listen to the preaching of the crusade. Our good friend Matthew Paris, one of the major chroniclers of the mid 13th century, is a monk from England. He's very well informed, but very biased against basically everyone that's not English and or the English king. So the English king is also a problem. It's basically England and the sentiment of the Crusades. He also doesn't like Innocent IV, but he likes the papacy. But for him, the problem with him, the problem of the Crusades is, for once, the taxation of England, and then secondly, also that the crusade is not issued, or that the support for the crusade of St. Louis of France is not given, and therefore all these other crusading projects are happening, which he then, of course, delegitimizes in his chronic. So there is crusading spirit going on, but at that point, the perspectives already start to vary. Where with the multitude of possible crusades happening, the perspective of the people, or at least the intellectuals, seem to shift towards then this crusade is legitimate, the other one is in that moment not legitimate.
Thank you, David. I see that Charlotte has raised her hand. Charlotte, please go ahead. And then we'll go to Valentina's questions in the chat box.
Yeah, thanks. I just had a question relating to this crusading spirit and that it was crumbling a bit. Could you talk a bit more about the logistics and the financing of this crusade, and maybe how it links to the other crusades of the big list of the crusading history?
Wait, so there's okay. Could you quickly repeat? I zoned out with like multiple questions. I'm sorry.
No, just if you could expand a bit more on the finances and the logistics of organizing this crusade. Was it easy to get it financed? Because you talk about people paying for them, the call of the papacy, but then if you like compare it to the bigger crusades that made the list, do you see some similarities, or how could it help you define this one as a crusade?
So if I go back here on, but if I can switch here in my presentation again, okay, good, now it starts moving. So what we see here, that people have the timeline somewhat in mind. So what is happening here, the Seventh Crusade, that's the crusade that's happening at the same time into the Levant. That's the Crusade of St. Louis. Basically, during that Council of Lyon, crusading taxes for the different projects have been issued. There is then basically crusading 10th and 20th, depending on the region and the addressees, so be it the clerics or just be it the general populace, issued. And these crusading taxes seem to have been paid, even though, as we know then from England, especially from Matthew Paris, with complaints, and there in England he basically every third or fourth entry is about him complaining about the struggles that local parish, city, nobleman, whatever, has with like the papal legate trying to collect the money. So there seems to be some sentiment that people seemed a bit overtaxed by the crusade. Regarding the logistic, the same goes for the manpower. The main problem is then what the papacy is trying to do. It's trying to manage the whole this amount of crusading project, and so issues the calls for financing and for recruitment into towards specific areas. So the Iberian Peninsula, for example, is fully not called upon for none of the other projects, and they are just left to focus on their own Reconquista and driving out of the Muslims out of the southern tip of the peninsula at that point. The crusade on the Levant is mainly focused on or is mainly issued in England and France. So this in the end becomes mostly a project of the two, and only and Norway for some reason. Norway also is then categorized in that regard. For the crusade against the Hohenstaufens, the call is issued and preached basically in the empire, especially north of the Alps. Brabant, which gets their own mention because probably the Duke of Brabant was like one of the leading figures in the opposition, even though it's a firm part of the empire at that point. Denmark and Poland. So basically just general territory north of the Alps is then focused for recruitment there. The crusade against or the project against the Mongolians or possible furthermore, or yeah, for the first try to have a crusade against or to drive out the Mongols out of Hungary, that call is basically also only issued in the empire. And how successful it is, I don't know. That is one of the things that I still need to check how much Germans, quote unquote, actually took part there or what actually happened. Regarding the possible further Mongol incursions, that this task basically had then been sourced out by then to the Teutonic Order, who had their own started their own state formation along the Baltic coast and the bishoprics at the border of the empire and Poland. So the whole thing had been territorially very much divided. And then other projects like the support for the Latin Empire, basically Balduin on his Europe tour, trying to get funds everywhere, had to sell all the reliquaries that he had already to his Flemish and French relations that he still had, and take what he could get from who gave something. Those calls had been preached to some degree in Italy. Also, and then of course local crusades against heretics or local happenings like in this conflict or a sub happening of this conflict against the Hohenstaufens is that at some point, because the Dukes of Bavaria support the Staufens too much for the Pope, is that they get threatened, or maybe it happened that the sources don't really tell, with the crusade against Bavaria. So that is then very much local phenomenon, or in northern Italy, preaching a crusade against heretics in the cities of Lombardy happens. This is then very much a phenomenon where then people in Lombardy are called upon to basically form their own little local crusading, let's say militia or whatever, to drive off or march against these perceived heretics. I hope that somewhat answered the question.
Thank you, Charlotte. David, Valentina wants to know what aspect of the Crusades do you think, or what aspect of your current research are you going to most focus on, and what are the next steps that you're planning with regard to the research that you've undertaken on the Crusades?
Yeah, okay. What are the next steps? I'm currently basically going through what we have on narrative sources from basically the late 13th and early 14th century. So everything roughly contemporary that could give original information, and searching there for these small highlights these small mentions of crusading activity happening through the papal registers, you basically get these big calls for crusade and how the financing and so on worked, but how this how the stuff was implemented on a local level, where actual crusaders appear, where in which parish, bishopric, town, whatever, you can actually then see local happenings of calls for crusades. I already worked through quite some of the narrative sources from the empire from that time period, and found some interesting stuff. Like, for example, in one Bavarian monastery, the analyst reports that about the crusades against the Mongols and against the emperor being preached in the 1240s. And in the for the now I need to watch out that I don't mix it up. I think for the crusade against the Mongols, the old and the middle-aged people were called upon, and for the crusades or responded, and for the crusade against the emperor, the basically the teenager and the young adults responded, which is then like 3 entries above each other for like the years, what is it, 42 and then 47 or something like that. Or like the story of the complaints in another Bavarian town against the preaching of crusade. Basically, these little highlights, or which castles, cities, whatever, then actually had military activity or local feuds or whatever happening, and can these be connected to the to the bigger conflict? Because of course, just because there is a bigger conflict happening, all the other local conflicts in between, basically neighboring counts and knights, didn't stop. The question then just is, how much are these things interconnected, and is it worthwhile to include that basically into my narrative of the conflict in between Innocence IV and the Hohenstaufens as a crusade? This is what I'm currently doing, and what I'll be busy for the next while. So, and then of course, what I now didn't manage to tell, the interconnections with the other crusades, how much that is relevant, I will also have to do somewhere in the next month, or I can start writing.
Thank you, David. We have about 2 minutes left. So if anybody has any last minute question or comment, you have the floor for about 1 minute or a half, or we could let David have a little breather and profusely thank him for taking out the time and for sharing his research with us. We would love to see where your research takes you. I'm especially interested in the Mongol part that you just mentioned, because that is something that because it comes closer to home for me. So I'd really like to know how you connect the Crusades and the Mongols, which are a little far in time, but how you do that, I'd really like to read that part of the research.
I can tell you there has been, especially in the last 15, 20 years, a lot of research and a lot of publications, especially on that topic. So this stuff, at least for a while, I think in the early 2010s or the 2010s, was very much a thing, these early contexts. And this wave of this research focus on taking the Mongols or including the Mongols into this picture is still very much going on. So there has been, I think, a conference on it last year here in Germany, and I know that an article on crusades against the Mongols in the 13th century also will, I think, appear somewhere next year or something. So this is very much a thing that is being researched right now, and always and re-evaluated.
So we love to hear your insight on this topic that is, like you said, a very much discussed topic right now. We love to see your insights and your take on how your take is different from what is being done in the scholarship. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Thanks to David for sharing his research. Dear audience, just before we let you go, a gentle reminder: we would be convening again on the 21st of November. For the third ISHA PhD talk by Brooklyn Hottenstein, who would be joining us from Northwestern University. And her topic is Defining Victimhood, the Exclusion of People with Disabilities from Post-War Justice in Germany. Thank you. Thank you very much for joining us, everybody. We hope to see you again in the next talk. And also, if you would like to share your research here with us at ISHA, we would love to hear from you. Our email address is phd@isha.international. Be sure to drop an email or an expression of interest, and one of us from the team would get back to you at the earliest. Thank you again, David, for sharing your research. And we wish you the best of luck with your PhD publication.
Thank you, and thank you for chairing this this lecture.
I had a great time. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.